She had one rule for burying her old life: never let anyone see her hands move fast. For 3 years, Elena Voss had followed that rule perfectly. Quiet nurse, forgettable face, the kind of woman coworkers joked about behind her back and never thought twice about in front of her. Then they handed her the patient no one else would touch, a decorated Navy SEAL, deaf since a blast that should have killed him, refusing every nurse who walked through his door. They expected her to fail. They wanted to watch. Instead, her hands answered him in a language no coworker in that hospital had ever seen her use: sharp, silent, military. A code built for men who worked in the dark, without radios, without a second chance. And when his eyes found the old scar on her wrist, the dying SEAL grabbed her hand and whispered a name the United States Navy had officially buried 3 years ago. Her name. Before we go further, if you're the kind of person who roots for the quiet ones, the ones everyone underestimates until the moment they can't be ignored anymore, hit subscribe. Because what happens next isn't just her secret coming undone. It's the reason she was buried in the first place. Coming back to finish the job. The nurse's station went quiet the way rooms go quiet right before someone gets hurt. Not from fear. From anticipation. "Room 14, said charge nurse Denise Okafor, tapping her pen against the chart like a gavel. Chief Marcus Cade. Navy SEAL, retired. Deaf since the blast that took half his hearing and damn near the rest of him. Won't let anyone touch him unless he decides to like them." A resident near the coffee station laughed into his cup. "So never." He threw a blood pressure cuff at Nurse Ramirez this morning. Denise added. Hit her in the shoulder. Elena Voss stood at the edge of the station, arms folded, saying nothing. She had learned 3 years ago that silence was armor. Nobody suspected the quiet ones. Nobody watched a woman who never raised her voice, never volunteered an opinion, never gave them a single reason to look twice. Dr. Preston Ashby stepped out of the physician's lounge. Sleeves rolled with surgical precision, the kind of handsome that came with its own inflated sense of authority. "Voss." He didn't look up from his tablet. "You're calm. Boring even. Take Cade." Someone near the printer snorted. "Maybe you can talk him down," Ashby said, finally glancing at her the way he'd glance at furniture. "Or at least keep him from throwing things at people who matter." Elena took the chart without a word. Marcus Cade, 39. Bilateral profound hearing loss. Blast trauma. Left below knee amputation. Admitted for fever, tachycardia, right-sided rib pain following prosthetic fitting. Then in red, 3 times combative, non-compliant, difficult. She hated those words. They usually meant somebody had stopped listening a long time before the patient stopped cooperating. She walked toward room 14, the laughter trailing behind her like smoke that hadn't cleared yet. Through the narrow window, she saw him sitting upright, spine hard against the wall, not the pillow. His eyes tracked the door, the window, the oxygen valve, the sharps container. Not agitation. Reconnaissance. She'd seen that posture in exactly one kind of man, the kind who never fully came home from wherever he'd been. 2 orderlies hovered near the bed, useless and grateful when she waved them out. Elena stepped in slowly, palms open, body angled, so the door stayed visible to him, not blocked. "My name is Elena," she signed. "I'm your nurse. I won't touch you without asking." Cade froze, not because she signed, because she signed well, fluent, fast, unhesitating. His hands moved, sharp and testing. "Who taught you?" "A friend." She signed back. "Name." "You interview all your nurses?" Something shifted behind his eyes, not quite a smile. A crack in a wall built a long time ago. "No students." "No Ashby." "No restraints," he signed. "Agreed. Unless you become a danger." "I'm not the danger here." He studied her for a long moment, the way a man studies terrain before deciding whether it will hold his weight. Then he nodded once and let her check his vitals. Blood pressure high, pulse climbing, respirations too fast. His right hand kept drifting toward his ribs, the same spot the chart had dismissed as anxiety. "Pain here?" She signed, touching near the site without touching him. "Yes, since this morning. Worse after the fitting." "Hard to breathe?" "Yes." She listened to his lungs. "Left side, fine. Right lower field, diminished. Not gone. Not yet. You need to be reassessed. She signed. Doctor says anxiety. Doctor is wrong. Cade's expression changed. Something more careful. More alert. You military? No. Lie. I'm a nurse. She signed. That's the only answer I'm giving. He watched her hands, her stance, the way she kept the bed between herself and the door, without ever blocking either exit. Then his fingers shifted into something else entirely. Shorter, sharper, silent in a way Acel never was. Not sign language. Code. Pain spreading. Breath short. Something internal. Elena's pulse dropped into her stomach. No hospital patient should have known that language. No civilian ever learned it. It belonged to men who worked without radios, without light, without backup. Men who needed a way to talk when talking could get them killed. Cade saw the recognition cross her face before she could bury it. His eyes widened. He signed the sequence again, then added one word. Identify. She should have looked confused. That would have been safe. Instead, his oxygen monitor dropped. 91%. She answered with a single tactical sign, the first she'd used in 3 years. Hold. I see you. Cade stopped breathing for half a second. His gaze locked on her left wrist, on the thin, pale scar disappearing under her watch band. Rope burn. Old. Clean. His hands slowed, waited now, like each sign cost him something. Sparrow? Elena stepped back, as if the name had physical mass. No, she signed. Sparrow died. Cade's eyes didn't leave her wrist. Then somebody buried a liar. The door swung open behind her before she could answer, and Denise's voice cut through the room. Why are the blinds closed? And Elena turned, calm mask already sliding back into place, while behind her the monitor kept climbing, and the man the whole hospital had written off as difficult sat perfectly still, watching the only person in the building who had ever truly seen him. Dr. Ashby arrived irritated, tablet in hand, already dismissing whatever Elena was about to say. What did he do? Nothing, Elena said. His status changed. Pulse 128. Respirations 30. Fever spiking. Oxygen down to 91. Right lower breath sounds diminished. Ashby glanced through the doorway at Cade, who sat rigid against the wall, jaw tight, one hand pressed his ribs. Anxiety, Ashby said. His lungs don't know the difference between anxiety and internal bleeding, doctor. A resident behind Ashby whispered something about a rookie diagnosing SEALs. Ashby's jaw hardened. You've been assigned to this patient for 40 minutes. Voss. I've treated him for 18 days. And he's been getting worse for the last 20. Something in her voice made the hallway go quiet. Ashby leaned in, low enough that only she could hear it. You're not special. You're not the first new nurse who wanted attention. If attention oxygenated patients, Elena said, he'd already be cured. Ashby's face flushed. He ordered a nebulizer treatment. The wrong treatment. And stalked off before she could argue further, tossing over his shoulder that she wasn't to escalate without his order. Clear, he said. It didn't mean obedience. It meant she now understood exactly what she was working against. Back in the room, Cade signed the moment the door shut. Doctor is stupid. Despite everything, Elena almost smiled. Then his hand pressed harder into his side, and the monitor screamed past 130. His sign came fast, urgent, back in the old code. Pressure. Right side. Bad. Now. She placed the oxygen line to second. He nodded consent. His oxygen kept falling anyway. 89. Ashby returned when the alarm wouldn't stop. Took one look at the numbers, and said the word that made Elena's blood go cold. Sedative. 2 milligrams. Cade read enough off his lips to understand. His face hardened into refusal. No, Elena said, stepping between them. Not until we rule out a respiratory cause. You do not sedate a man who can't breathe. You don't override me. The oxygen dropped to 86. The alarm shattered the tension into pieces. Elena hit the rapid response button herself before Ashby could reach for the cancel switch, and Cade, faster than a man with a chest full of trapped air should have been, caught the doctor's wrist and held it there, not to hurt him, just to stop him. Release, Elena signed. Cade let go instantly. The obedience, the trust, silenced the room more than the alarm had. The rapid response team swept the doctor's authority aside within minutes. Portable imaging confirmed what Elena already knew. Right-sided pneumothorax, collapsing lung, oxygen crashing toward the low 70s while Ashby stood frozen, unwilling to be the man who'd missed it and unwilling to let anyone else fix what he'd missed. Elena opened the decompression kit. "Stop," Ashby snapped. "You touch him, your career is over." Cade grabbed her sleeve, signed against her palm. "You do it." "Consent given," Elena said, and by the time Ashby found the breath to shout again, the needle was already in. Second intercostal space, midclavicular line, and the hiss of escaping air filled the room like something exhaling after years underwater. Cade's oxygen climbed. 83, 87, 90. Nobody in the room moved for a long moment. Not the doctor, not the trauma surgeon who arrived seconds later and asked flatly, "Who decompressed him?" "I did," Elena said. The surgeon looked at Ashby. "Why didn't you?" Ashby had no answer. That didn't sound like confession. By afternoon, the story had already mutated to the hospital's grapevine into something unrecognizable. The rookie nurse who stabbed a Navy SEAL with a needle, the patient who only obeyed her, the doctor who nearly lost him. Whispers followed Elena down every hallway. She might be military. She might be dangerous. She kept walking. She'd survived worse than whispers. At 3:10, she was summoned to administration. The conference room had the kind of frame values on the wall that only got framed once nobody actually lived by them anymore. Respect, integrity, service. Administrator Dennis Pruitt sat at the head of the table, Ashby beside him, already composing his version of events. "You performed an invasive procedure without authorization," Pruitt said. "A life-saving procedure. That's not your call to make. His oxygen made that call. I just carried it out." Pruitt tapped his pen, unimpressed, then glanced at a folder he hadn't opened yet, the one detail Elena hadn't accounted for. "There's something else," he said. "Chief Cade called your name today. Sparrow, do you know what that means?" The air in the room changed temperature. "Ask him," Elena said. "We're asking you." "I don't know what he meant." Ashby smiled the way men smile when they think they finally found a thread that unravels someone. "Lie." Elena held his eyes and said nothing, because the truth was that somewhere in a sealed file 3 years old, a Navy report had already answered that question for them. It just hadn't been declassified yet. And outside the conference room window, in a hospital corridor 2 floors below, a man in a maintenance uniform with a badge turned backward was asking the front desk which room belonged to Chief Marcus Cade. Pruitt closed the folder without opening it fully. A small mercy, or maybe just cowardice dressed as procedure. "This meeting isn't over," he said. "But Chief Cade's condition requires we adjourn for now." Elena stood. "Then let me get back to my patient." She didn't wait for permission. Cade was awake when she returned, chest tube taped and draining, eyes tracking the door the second it opened. His hands moved before she'd even crossed the room. "They asked about the name." "Yes." "What did you tell them?" "Nothing they could use." He studied her for a long moment, something heavier settling behind his eyes. "I looked for you, after Blackcurrant." Elena's hand stilled. "They told us Sparrow drowned pulling Hale free." He signed. "Everyone died that day except the 2 of us. And you. I shouldn't be a story you tell." She signed back. "I'm not her anymore. You cut a hole in my chest 3 hours ago with your hands not shaking. You're still her." Elena turned away, checking the drainage chamber instead of answering, because some truths were easier to survive than say out loud. She didn't notice Ashby in the doorway until Marla, the young nurse who'd laughed loudest that first morning, cleared her throat. "Elena!" Marla's voice had lost its edge from 3 days ago. "Administration's asking again. And there's a maintenance guy on this floor nobody recognizes. Badge looks wrong. It felt off." Elena's instincts, dulled by 3 years of deliberate quiet, sharpened instantly. "Wrong how?" "Backward. And his shoes were too clean for maintenance." Elena stepped into the hallway. Down at the far end, a man in a dark jacket stood near the supply room, badge flipped, watching room 14, without watching it directly. The trained kind of attention that didn't look like attention at all. She'd spent 3 years learning to disappear. She recognized someone else doing the opposite, learning to be seen as nothing. "Lock the medication room," she told Marla quietly. "Now." Don't ask why. Marla, for the first time since Elena had met her, didn't argue. The lights flickered. Once, twice. The overhead system crackled with a maintenance announcement about a temporary power fluctuation that nobody in that hallway believed for more than a few seconds. Elena pulled the blinds in room 14 and dragged the recliner against the door at an angle. Threat? Cade signed, already pushing himself upright despite the tube in his chest. Unknown male. Bad badge. Watching this room. Mine or yours? Maybe both. The overhead speakers cracked again, sharper this time. Code silver, main lobby. A scream rose faintly from somewhere near the elevators. The door handle turned. The recliner caught the first push. A shoulder hit the gap in the frame. Dark jacket, wrong shoes, one hand hidden behind his back. Elena didn't wait to find out what was in it. She drove the heavy end of an 4-pole into his wrist. Something small and metal clattered to the floor. Not a weapon built to shoot. A syringe. The man lunged anyway. Cade, chest tube and all, looped the call cord around his arm the second. He came within reach. And between the two of them, a wounded SEAL and a nurse the hospital had mocked 3 days earlier, the intruder hit the floor and stayed there. Security arrived late, loud, and utterly unprepared for what they found. A rookie nurse standing over a man twice her size, and a deaf patient everyone had written off as dangerous, holding him down without being asked. The man on the floor looked up at Elena and smiled like getting caught had only ever been step one. "You should have stayed buried, Sparrow." Cade's hands moved, sharp and certain. "Trap." Elena straightened, her pole still in her grip, and understood, with the cold clarity of someone who'd survived exactly this feeling once already, that whatever had followed Marcus Cade into this hospital hadn't come for his silence. It had come to make sure hers stayed permanent. Down the corridor, the elevator doors opened and lockdown lights began sweeping red across a hallway full of veterans who had no idea the quiet nurse they'd been gossiping about for 3 days was the only reason any of them were about to make it through the next 10 minutes alive. The man on the floor laughed, even with security's knee in his back. "Everybody from Black Current knows you. Name?" Elena said, "Damon Vale." His grin widened. "You sold out 3 years ago. I'm the one who sold the map that turned Black Current into a grave. And here you are, playing nurse." Behind her, footsteps. Fast, then careful. She turned to find a silver-haired Navy captain stepping off the elevator. 2 federal agents flanking him, eyes locking onto her wrist before they reached her face. "Sparrow." The word emptied the hallway of noise. "Captain Ward," Elena said quietly. Not a question. A name she'd buried alongside her own. Ward's gaze moved from her to Cade, propped in a wheelchair with a chest tube taped to his side and fury written plainly across his face. "He said you'd be here. I didn't believe him until now." Administrator Pruitt appeared, flustered, already reaching for control that had left the building an hour ago. "This is a hospital, not a—" "Ma'am," Ward said, without looking at her, "I have a compromised federal wing, a wounded operator, and a woman the Navy declared dead who just neutralized an armed intruder within 4-pole. I'll take the room." They found the second team near the loading dock. The missing evidence drive Cade had smuggled in, hidden not in the prosthetic case they'd stolen, but sewn into the liner itself. Bait and truth, sitting 3 feet apart the whole time. Elena pried it free while Cade watched, breath shallow, eyes never leaving her hands. "Backup copy," he signed, "in case they got the first one. You should have told me you were carrying this into my hospital. Would you have let me in the door?" "No. That's why I didn't tell you." Something in her chest loosened despite everything. The closest thing to a laugh she'd allowed herself in 3 years. Then the lights failed completely. Red emergency strobe swallowing the hallway, and 4 men in stolen hospital jackets came around the corner with pistols low and masks up, expecting the panic that untrained people always gave them. They found a corridor full of veterans instead. Old men who didn't scatter, who'd survived worse mornings than this one. A cane hooked an ankle, a wheelchair blocked a retreat. Hot coffee from Marla's steady. Furious hand caught a gun wrist mid-motion. Elena went for the leader, palm to wrist, elbow to throat, the tunnel flashing behind her eyes for exactly half a second before she breathed once and came back to the room she was actually standing in. 9 seconds. That was all it took. Train violence never looked like the movies. It looked like a door slamming shut. Hours later, with contractors cuffed and the evidence authenticated on a federal tablet, Ward found her outside Cade's room, still in torn scrubs, the scar on her wrist finally uncovered instead of hidden beneath a watch band. Once this drive goes public, your sealed status collapses, Ward said. People who buried you the first time will want you moved somewhere quiet again. I know. Extraction's an option. New name, new file, new silence. Elena looked through the glass at Cade, arguing wordlessly with a nurse trying to make him rest, then at Marla teaching an elderly veteran the sign for water with patient, careful hands. No, she said. I'm done disappearing on someone else's schedule. Ward studied her the way commanding officers study soldiers they're about to lose to a better life. That's not the answer I came prepared for. I'm not answering as your operator anymore, Captain. She pushed the door open. I'm answering as his nurse. Cade signed one thing before she reached his bed, hand steady despite the tube in his chest. You didn't have to stay dead for me to live. I know that now. She signed back. Then stop apologizing with your silence. Elena clipped her badge straight. Elena Voss, RN. No rank stitched beneath it. No call sign anyone would ever officially admit existed. It was enough. Because the story the hospital would tell for years afterward would get most of it wrong. The drive, the siege, the conspiracy. And none of them would understand that the real ending had nothing to do with what she'd survived. It was simpler than that. She had a name again. And for the first time in 3 years, she chose to answer to it.